Hi, I'm Sarah,
And I'm Tess.
and this is the Basically Bookish Podcast.
We just got finished reading Manacled and we need to talk about it. Manacled by SenLinYu is a fanfic based off of the Harry Potter universe where Harry Potter is dead and Voldemort wins the war.
Magical birth rates have declined, so Voldemort decides to start a, quote, magical repopulation program using half-bloods and muggle-born witches, very similarly to Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood.
Hermione Granger is the last surviving member of the Order of the Phoenix, and there's something she's hiding. Memories that she has tucked away that not even she can access.
Hermione is assigned to the High Reeve, who is Voldemort's right-hand man, executioner, and none other than Draco Malfoy himself. And our story starts here.
Welcome to hell. Please join us.
No problem. And then which one of us wants to tackle it?
I'll start. Let's talk triggers. This book is extremely dark. It definitely needs to be read at the right time. It circles around themes like slavery, Stockholm syndrome, torture, war. It is very dark. It's very gory. It's very explicit. So you have to be okay with a little bit of torture in your novels to get through this one, especially the first part. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. And it's a really good, that was mostly what people talked about, that it needed to come with like a bigger warning than bigger than normal warning.
Right.
Okay, let's start with our spoiler-free review. How many stars would you give this book and why?
So for me, I would give this book, I'm going to actually say 4.5 out of 5 stars.
I said the same thing.
I am definitely a bit of a 5-star reader if I like a book, and it's been a couple months since I finished this one. And so kind of having that time away from it, I feel the reason why it doesn't get that other half a star is because of the length. I do think that it could have been cut down quite a bit, especially that first part. There was a lot of repetition, and I do think it lended to just diving us down into this really dark, desolate, isolated, and hopeless space. But I definitely think that that could have been condensed.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I went with a 4.5 because it's still so fresh for me. I finished it 2 days ago, and I know that my feelings will change, but parts of it are like singed into my memory forever. While it was nice having a familiar magical system, this book did make my stomach hurt. I didn't want to turn the page. I wanted to DNF for several chapters. For me, it was more explicit than Handmaid's Tale. And this is likely due in large part to the medical aspect of the repopulation and obviously the war.
Yeah, very dark.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you ended up finishing it so we could have this conversation because I couldn't go through that alone.
Yeah, it's one of those books where you hear everybody telling you, no, it's worth it, it's worth it. But I guess my advice would be to anyone that's curious about it, if you're going to start it, you should see it through to the end because if you finish it halfway through or try to DNF it at any point, it's going to completely change your experience and you won't understand why anyone would ever want to read this book.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, with the caveat being that if you're in a mental state where you truly can't deal with those themes, then come back to it.
And if you are triggered by medical aspects within stories, there's definitely a lot of that. I would venture to say that SenLinYu knew someone that went to medical school or herself is somehow involved because there was a lot of inside behind the scene kind of information provided throughout.
Yeah.
I think the characters, for me, they change places in a lot of ways. And maybe that's a take on what war will do to the people experiencing it. For me, before Harry died in the canon series, Harry was the one going dark. In my opinion, he was having the nightmares and really starting to explore the darker side of his magic. And Hermione was forever idealistic. So I felt like they changed places in the book for me a bit.
Yeah.
That being said, oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That being said, she wrote a gripping story that gives a more realistic view of a war-torn magical world. I didn't realize how much of the original books were fairy tale. It's the against all odds, love triumphs, and nearly everyone is saved and nothing is wasted or lost trope. And to think that these essentially children could handily win a war with basic year one spells was immature and idealistic. And I Obviously, they're children's books, but I hadn't quite grown up with the characters yet.
I totally agree. All right, so should we get into some spoilers?
I had a couple more things to say about the non-spoiler if you want. I did notice elements of fanon versus canon. For instance, the mind healer. That's not from the original series. I looked it up, but it's so clever. I just love it's very clever. On that note, I completely understand the draw of fan fiction. It's so much fun to riff on these beloved characters that have, in a lot of ways, been built into these fictional monoliths. Hermione, forever pious and true, Draco, always the villain, and Harry, the hero. It was just really fun to experience that. This is one of my first fan fictions.
Yeah, this is my first fanfic.
Yeah. And for me, Hermione has always been my favorite character. So to see her reduced so explicitly, I feel like a lot of the aspects of the character that I had come to love were gone. And that's possibly, again, what I wanted to say the author intended. As a commentary on war, working in the hospital, seeing the worst of the war, it would affect you. So it makes sense. I loved the aspect of the spy games, and this is the first time I have really understood the ruse of purposefully making yourself less important within a group in order to lower the value you would have if captured or lost. Like, say you were a prominent figure within the resistance and you would go about like intentionally hollowing out your influence in order to save both the resistance and possibly yourself in some cases where you successfully like deboard the platform, like if you lose. And I just had never really appreciated that before, and I thought she spelled it out really well.
I agree.
Sorry, I had a lot to say.
No, it's perfect.
I loved these books growing up. Okay,
Yeah.
that's the end of my spoiler free.
Yeah, it's so strange also reading Manacled as we're reading the original Harry Potter series to our children.
Right.
And really kind of picking up on all of those like subtle nuances in characters, just like you were saying, how the characters aren't always very true to the original.
Right. They're all grown up now.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into some spoilers. Here is the plot of Manacled in a nutshell. So it's broken up into 3 parts. Part 1 starts in present day. Harry Potter has lost. Hermione Granger is imprisoned in Hogwarts before being released to be a surrogate in the repopulation program. This part is very dark and very sad and somewhat repetitive. She's given to the High Reeve, who's Draco Malfoy, and she is assaulted and R-worded repeatedly in a very dry and clinical way. She's checked on periodically by Healer Strauss, and her memory is explored through occlumency, both from Draco Malfoy and from Voldemort during this time. And she's also dealing with agoraphobia, and she's very afraid of open spaces.
Yeah, it's rough. Part 2.
It's not a good time.
Yeah, and you have a hard time understanding what's happening, and that's kind of built into it. Part 2, the flashbacks begin. Hermione trained as a healer because she knew how much they would be needed during the war, and that everyone else would want the glory of the battlefield. The resistance is very righteous and refuses to use dark magic or nefarious means to win the war, causing a rift between Hermione, Harry, and Ron. Snape and Moody have been secretly torturing prisoners to get information, and Hermione helps to keep them alive during the process. There is a Death Eater willing to become a spy for the Resistance in return for a full pardon after the war, and they've requested Hermione Granger. The Death Eater is Draco Malfoy. The two slowly fall in love, with Hermione teaching Draco to heal and Draco teaching Hermione to fight and train physically. And their relationship is really born out of this mutual loneliness and a deep understanding of each other and a deep aversion to the war. Harry dies, the war is lost. Hermione blows up Sussex and is captured and imprisoned in Hogwarts. Voldemort and the Death Eaters are experimenting on Muggleborn and Mudblood witches and wizards in Sussex, and Hermione is dealing with the fallout of those experiments. Such a good book. After Hermione blows up Sussex, she is captured and imprisoned at Hogwarts, which is an impenetrable fortress where they're keeping all of the captors.
And then we move on to part 3, which is back to the present day. Hermione's pregnant and all of her memories have returned. So she understands that she has this very deep and poignant relationship with Draco, but she can't comprehend or wrap her mind around everything that he's done to her while being in his captivity, whether or not he was required to. Malfoy, we see in this part, is extremely self-loathing. He thinks that he has absolutely no redeemable qualities, and he is resolved to sacrifice himself in an attempt to save Hermione and potentially bring down Voldemort's regime. Hermione tries to find a way to remove Draco's dark mark so that they can escape together. Lucius returns to Malfoy Manor and he's completely unhinged. Lucius ends up killing Astoria, who was Draco's wife, and Hermione and Draco find a way to remove the dark mark, but that means cutting off Draco's arm. As they flee Malfoy Manor, a Patronus of a dragon appears and burns down the house with Lucius inside.
That was like, I literally was like Googling things. They get to the island where Jenny Weasley and James, her son, are. And Jenny hates Malfoy for everything that he has done, and she should. She's only received a portion of the information, and from her perspective, everything that Draco has done is deplorable. And to have a somewhat peaceful life together, Hermione's memory is getting worse due to the damage caused to it by hiding the memories and occlumency used during torture. They are hyper vigilant and read the papers all the time, even though they're a couple days behind. The wizarding world believes Draco died in a murder-suicide with his father, and they live on a secluded island somewhere in Asia where they lead a very quiet life.
Voldemort's reign finally comes to an end, and the wizarding world is wondering what to do with the aftermath of the war, what to do with the surrogates, what to do with all of the children that were born out of the repopulation program. There's a question, do these children stay with their biological mothers? Do they go to other members of these aristocratic families? The wizarding world also believes that Hermione died in post-war imprisonment, and Ginny wants to go back and kill Voldemort once and for all, and she actually goes and does just that. Ginny also decides to go back to London and help repair the school and the society that Harry fought and died for, because she desperately wants her son James to attend as a student. 10 years later, Hermione and Malfoy's daughter, Aurora, is heading to school, and she's attending under the last name Black, like Sirius Black. And she stumbles across a book about the history of the Second Wizarding War, considered to be the quintessential text on the subject. There's a chapter on Draco Malfoy talking about how he was the most notoriously evil Death Eater and had no redeemable qualities. Then James and Aurora see a photo of Harry, Hermione, and Ron sitting together on the couch. And the photo caption read, "The Hogwarts Trio, Christmas 2002. Harry Potter with friends, Ron Weasley, see Weasley, Ron, Chapter 7, and Muggle-born witch, Hermione Granger. Granger left England at the start of the Second Wizarding War to study healing abroad. She survived the war, but died during imprisonment while a surrogate in the repopulation program. She was a non-active member in the Order of the Phoenix and did not fight." Which we just read, 1,200 pages of the most sacrifice and tenacity just to have everything that both of them went through reduced to a footnote. It kills me.
It does. And it's so realistic of war that extreme sacrifice would just be chalked up to circumstance. I knew the final line of the book because I had it spoiled for me several times on social media, but it still gutted me. I felt like I was having a panic attack when it said 10 years later and Aurora and James were all grown up. I thought it was terrifying.
Yeah, I feel like we get both a really positive, happy ending in a way that I did not think that they were going to come out of this, but also a tragic one where they didn't get to reclaim themselves. To the world, Draco was irredeemable and he was dead. Hermione did nothing to help and she was gone. And they're, in a way, manacled to their island that they can't leave. They can't go back and participate in society. And they're too really damaged to even try, I think. So it was so poignant and so heartbreakingly beautiful. I love this book.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I found Draco to be completely intoxicating, but in the toxic way, just as the author intended. I think I admit that while reading about the dedication and the unwavering presence and knowing that the High Reeve could and would like tear down the walls for her was intoxicating. There's something undeniably sexy about that. It was just so problematic on both sides, you know?
He is the morally black villain and hero of this story. If you are looking for a book where he will burn the entire world to save one person, to save her, this is the story for you.
I literally have that written down. It reminds me of that phrase: a hero will sacrifice you to save the world, and a villain will sacrifice the world in order to save you. And Hermione really did make her choice.
I wanted to point out that people have also recommended, if you do a second read, to read it in chronological order. So you would start with the flashbacks, and then you would go to part one, and then finish with part three. I also do think if you haven't read this book yet, we're kind of making this review for people who've already read this book and want to discuss it, want to, find your people. Like, we'd love to hear from you guys. But if you are hesitant about this, especially because of how dark and rough part one is, the whole book is dark and rough, but especially part one, potentially reading it for the first time in chronological order might be a little bit better. Because I think when you're going through part one and it's just like more and more of the same and it's getting worse and worse and darker and more violent, you're like, okay, well, I like don't want to keep doing this, because you can't really see that like light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. You can't imagine a world where anything that Draco is doing is justifiable. And
Right.
the out of order memories, they're just like you at one point when I was not wanting to move past part one, you had said that in all it was a masterpiece. And I think that out of order memories were really that symphony. It relied on both Hermione and the reader's inability to put everything in order, and then just dishing it out at the right times gave you this overwhelming gasping feeling of, oh my God. Like I had thought there was no way to justify this. And I'm not saying there's anything justifiable about it, but I found this so depraved that I found Draco to be nothing but evil. And now as time goes on and you hear more of the story, she was able to paint it in such a way that, like you said, everyone was manacled.
Right, very much. And Draco, I feel like he is so manacled by his love for other people, but not people in general. Just like there was a quote, I think it's Snape that tells her that the Malfoy men are like dragons and they're very possessive. It's not just a name, Draco. And his love for his mother was really the catalyst of him becoming this awful, terrible person. Like, he wanted to protect his mother, he wanted to save his mother, and that's what started him on the path of becoming a Death Eater in the first place. And then we have all of these, scenes where his mother's being tortured back at home. He has to pretend like everything's okay, going back to school even. So meanwhile, like, he's just a kid. And even thinking back in like the Harry Potter books in book 6, they're 14, 15 years old, and he's tasked with killing Dumbledore. And I think that this, knowing that his mother was in a cage at home and that she was being relentlessly tortured, and that kind of pushed him, I don't know. I feel like Draco gets a really well thought out redemption arc in this fanfic.
Right. I agree with that. There were, as you know, I struggled to get through it, but there were 2 times in the book that Draco said something that brought me fully back in. And the first was when it's so funny because I just told you the last time we recorded that I wasn't going to cry when we recorded.
Oh no. It's okay, you're in a safe space.
But I do love these. Like I said, I grew up reading these books. And so I loved this part so much. And I'm not sure what touched me about it, but I just wanted to share. So the first time was when Draco was talking about first meeting Hermione, which is a scene that we all know well. And he says something about, very smart or something like that. And he says, quote, and obviously insecure. And I hadn't considered that a child, or that he had seen that aspect of Hermione and would capitalize on it. Looking back, we obviously all felt that way about Hermione, but just as in life, when you look back and see your own actions in a different light, for me, that was the moment that the author really showed her ability to seamlessly write this book into the series. A lot of it fits with the narrative that was already laid out. The second time that Draco said something that brings me back in is when he says, you don't get to push everyone away so that they can be okay with using you and letting you die. There's a quality about Draco in this book that is very dreamy. He sees Hermione, and it's very validating.
I also don't know what it is about the fact that he finds himself so unlovable and so unredeemable that just makes me like, let me help you.
Draco was just determined to die, and it was getting to be like that meme where women, when they die, it's like, I just want to be surrounded by my family. And then it's like men, and it like cuts to like the drunk ex-pilot dad from Independence Day, and he's like, hello boys, I'm back. Like, that's how I felt. Draco was just determined the entire time.
I love also the kind of back and forth and push and pull of like, I'm saving you. No, I'm saving you. No, I'm saving you. And it's like, I feel like both of them, Draco not so much, because Draco, I feel like he's very emotionally withdrawn, except with the very few select people that he really truly loves. But I feel like both of them have lost so much and feel so hopeless that they're hyper fixated on each other as being the one thing, just the one thing that maybe they could get right.
Right. Yeah. It's, we were talking about like the trauma bonding that they went through. You know, another trigger warning that I did want to put in there is by the time Hermione starts cutting herself, you know, we've lost so much of Hermione at that point. It's starting to feel like there's really no part of her left that's recognizable. And I felt like we watched her death in real time. I felt like Draco felt like he watched her death in real time. And there is something to be said about both being so broken that you can only be with each other.
And again, I think just SenLinYu really handling trauma in a way that is very adult, is very human, is very real. There are some losses that we never really fully recover from, and it does take a part of us.
Right.
So I really wanted to quickly mention the paper cranes trope. I thought that that was so sweet and so beautiful. There's Hermione finds herself making all of these paper cranes, and she doesn't remember why she does this. And then later we find out that it's because her parents, her father in particular, taught her how to make these paper cranes and told her, if you make 1,000, you get a wish. And so that would be like one of their little things that they would do together is make all these paper cranes. And at one point, she doesn't even remember how to make the cranes or why. And I just felt that that was so sad. And it really, again, just kind of highlighted this loss of self and this loss of innocence. And again, just really kind of hammering home those themes of trauma.
Right. It was once you start to realize that Hermione, you know, they talk about the consequences of her actions on her memory. And later in the book, once you realize that she's starting to forget, it is the most heart-wrenching moment for me in the book was just the loss of such a great character.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that saying that when someone dies, a library burns down.
Yeah. So talking a little bit about Harry and Ron slander, they do come off across a little bit righteous, a little bit, not even a little bit, they come off very righteous, very idealistic. They're very set in their own ways and judgmental, which I think kind of blends into this big question that I feel like Manacled really asks, where does the means justify the ends? What are you willing to do to save the people that you love? What are you willing to do to win?
Right.
Which is also kind of interesting as, you know, we just finished reading Throne of Glass and we're doing a deep dive on that if anybody's interested. All of those will be up on our pages as well. But Selena Sardathian, again, she is a person who will lie, steal, cheat, kill in the name of the greater good. Whereas in the Harry Potter world, I feel like Ron and Harry are very much still in their kind of Gryffindor mentality, where right will always triumph over evil because that's just the way things go. Just like you were saying earlier, it's this very fairy tale, very children's book. Everything is going to end up okay as long as we keep following the rules. And I thought that that was just very, very interesting.
Yeah, once they started to show adult Ron, I think it occurred to me that even if it wasn't in Manacled and even if it wasn't in the Harry Potter canon, I really don't like Hermione with Ron. I don't like that pairing at all. I feel like Ron's, even in the canon books, he's lazy and off the cuff, whereas I feel like Hermione would have to pick up a lot of the slack. And so I don't love that relationship for her. And I hadn't quite realized that until I saw him all grown up and saw the way that he was reacting and just the way that they described them. Also, something that came to mind was that Snape's story means nothing if Harry dies. It wasn't until long after his death that it occurred to me that all of their sacrifice was for nothing. James and Lily, that entire storyline is useless if Harry dies. But there's something sweet about Hermione, Draco, Jenny, and Harry's children all being together. I think that in this world, Snape's story became Hermione's, or however you want to say that. Hermione's became Snape's story. It's the story of silent sacrifice.
Absolutely. Right. I also think that there's a bit of a commentary on like healthcare workers here too, and how undervalued people are in like the healthcare field and how difficult that work is and necessary.
Right. And how it will for right. Yeah. Which might
Healthcare field.
yeah, which might have, been the extra sharp edge on it, I think, for me. Yeah, it will have a lasting effect and it will change how you view how to approach things. It will change what you think is needed to win. And I think that Hermione saw more of the truth because she was witness to the torture and witness to, I mean, there were a couple of the scenes where I just had to shut the book for a second because it was again, I had such an idealistic childlike view of the magical world of Harry Potter that it never occurred to me that someone could curse you by putting a porcupine in your chest. And just things like that were what caused me to think, oh yeah, this is actually what would be a more realistic view of a magical war. It wouldn't be disarming people and, oh, that's a good one, James, and stuff like that.
Yeah, before we get too far off topic, you reminded me of two things. One, I'm already forgetting, but the first one was the pairing between Hermione and Ron. I
Yes.
completely agree with you. I don't love those characters together. Do love the idea of Hermione and Draco.
Yes.
I think that the movies didn't really tie this in so much, but in the books, we definitely see on that first meeting where Draco is curious about them, kind of wants to be their friends. He's heard stories about Harry Potter, and he's excited to go to school with them. And then it just doesn't end up that way. But Draco is this very smart, very cunning, very dry, hardworking person as well, and talented wizard. And so I think that Hermione, and Draco, I think that makes way more sense. And other people do as well, obviously, because the Dramione fanfic is a complete
Huge.
Genre of fanfics.
Right. Yeah.
So please let us know which Dramione fanfic we should read next, because I'm definitely ready to dive in headfirst.
Yeah. And I did just want to say one more thing about the love of the spy game aspect to it. I did really enjoy that. The chapter where Lucius and Draco are in the manor and he comes back after killing Astoria and Hermione is freaking out. She's absolutely panicking. And Draco says to her, "Calm down. You're hardly something my father would ever look at." And I think that comment what really revealed the double and triple-sided work, the triple-sided nature of his work, because in that moment, Draco doesn't have a lot of lines throughout the book, especially where there's three people in the room. It's usually just one-on-one conversation. And so that comment was both equally comforting to Hermione and Lucius for different reasons. Hermione because she needed reassurance that Lucius wasn't going to touch her, and Lucius because he needed reassurance that Draco didn't want to touch her. And so I just thought it was really interesting to see Draco play on Lucius's bigotry in order to calm Hermione down. And there were a couple of other instances where he did that. And I thought that, again, that played to the gentle and disciplined nature that Draco has, was very reassuring to Hermione in a way that Ron's very sloppy.
Great.
And then I just had one final quote I wanted to share. It's Hermione, and she's thinking to herself. It said, "She told herself there would be more important things to console herself with after the war. The world felt so broken. She didn't know how it would ever be better." And I feel like that is such an excellent capture on the emotions around war and just quick changing events like that. You keep telling yourself that you're going to get through it. You just have to get through the next few minutes, just the next few things, and you're going to make it. And then everything will be better. And I just think that that's a common human emotion and something that we all experience all the time. Like, if I can just get through this and I can just get through this. And I think that this was a good story of showing that the reality of just scraping by is sometimes not what you wanted, but
Right.
what you got.
They've survived, but they're,
Right.
they're still alive.
Yeah. And it's so realistic that I think that's what makes it, because you can imagine this story being true a million times over.
Right. Especially with that all being reduced and almost just washed away
Right.
by the end of it.
A non-active member? Are you kidding?
Stop. It's definitely a pure dystopia with an underlying message of hope, resilience, and resistance. So, this fanfic is actually being reworked and it is going to be released. I believe the book comes out in September of 2026, and the book is called Alchemized. I definitely will be reading this book because and when I say reading, I mean I will be buying a copy of this book because obviously with Manacled being fanfic, you can't pay for it. You can download it. I don't know if you can still download it because it was being pulled from the internet. So SenLinYu could rewrite it to be published traditionally, but I definitely want to give her my money because
Yes.
this novel I think altered part of my brain chemistry that will never be the same, and she definitely deserves to be paid for her work.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know we had a hard time navigating fan fiction in general when we started looking into this book, and I'm really excited that she's going to see it brought to the light of day. And I think it'll be interesting just to see how the characters are changed in order to keep up with copyright.
Right. I also wonder if it would hit as emotionally hard without having the same attachment to the
Right.
characters.
Right.
Because just like you were saying, I grew up with Harry Potter too. And so it's like watching our characters that we grew up with go through this alternative reality ending, but aged up quite a bit through like
Right.
an adult lens. So, but even, we've talked about the plot, we've talked about our thoughts. Everything that we say will not change the way that you will feel emotionally as you're reading this book. It is Senlin Yu does such a beautiful job. Her writing evokes so much emotion, whether that's hope, despair, fear. You're going to feel all of your feelings reading this book. And yeah, I'm just really curious to see and read Alchemized.
Right. Yeah, she's an immersive writer. She really describes every aspect of the room and your feeling, and it will change you in a very deep way. So we just have to know, would you like us to do a deep dive plot recap of this book, of Manacled? Which Dramione fanfic should we read next?
Thank you so much for spending a part of your day with us, especially if you made it all the way to the end of this video.
And if you did make it all the way to the end, leave us some sort of magic themed emoji so we know you made it.
Make sure to subscribe to catch more episodes from us and follow us on all social media at Basically Bookish Pod.
Until next time,
Happy reading!
happy reading.